Now we come to a story that I shared the link with you the other day, quite excitedly, because I was interested in what was going on here. It's the headline: Cyprus accuses British company of illegally excavating ancient shipwrecks. Now, it's been a while since you've used the O word in the watching brief, but I figured this might be linked with a certain infamous salvage company. And it turns out that it is. But also, I'm interested as well in how other news outlets have covered this story, and we'll come to that in a moment. But before we get, yeah, before I ramble on too much on this, can you possibly outline what's going on here? Because you said that there was more to the story than meets the eye, and I'm intrigued to know what's actually happening behind this headline.
Okay, so what we're talking about is a story that appeared in the Observer in Britain on the 18th of April
Hmm.
and was picked up by other media, including the BBC. Um, and it refers to a discovery in the Eastern Mediterranean by a British maritime archaeologist called Dr. Sean Kingsley.
Hmm.
Um, and the article claims that amongst a number of other wrecks that were discovered in the course of work in the what used to be called the Levant, which is the area of the Eastern Mediterranean between roughly Sinai up through the coast of Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and, and Cyprus.
Hmm.
And the story principally features a wreck of what Dr. Kingsley says is a 17th century Ottoman Turkish merchant ship.
Hmm.
He describes it as an absolute colossus, the size of two normal sized ships from the period. And it contained, I'm quoting here, from the article by Dalia Auberge. Its vast cargo had hundreds of artifacts from 14 cultures and civilizations, including the earliest Chinese porcelain retrieved from a Mediterranean wreck, painted jugs from Italy, and peppercorns from India.
Hmm.
And then it talks about that it's one of the most spectacular examples of maritime technology and trade in any ocean. Its size is matched by the breadth of its cargoes. That's Dr. Kingsley being quoted directly there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and he talked. It then talks about in the Levantine Basin. This is quoting a man called Stephen Valery, who's the co-director of a company called Enigma, which is behind this. It says in the Levantine Basin, the Enigma wrecks lie beyond any country's territory. All the remains were carefully recorded using a suite of digital photography, HD video, photomosaics, and multi-beam sonar. For science and underwater exploration, these finds are a giant leap forward. Anybody who saw the results of the Black Sea expedition that Dr. Jonathan Adams from Southampton University led a couple of years back will know that that is somewhat over-egging the
Hmm.
Enigma pudding,
Hmm. Hmm.
because the, uh, the technology of ROVs using multi-beam sonar, HD video, and so on is now well established in mainstream maritime archaeology.
Yes.
Um, so this isn't groundbreaking. It's interesting,
Hmm.
but I think the backstory is even more interesting.
Okay. Well, and I suppose I'll just briefly then pop on to that other issue that I was curious about then, and then we'll come back to the backstory. And so
Mm.
much as, because as you say, the Observer article, which is on theguardian.com, um, has a headline: Mediterranean shipwreck reveals birth of globalisation in trade, and that sounds very exciting, very forthright, very. Uh, well, it sounds as though there's nothing wrong with that. And yet, this the Cyprus Mail headline, um, Cyprus accuses British company of illegally excavating ancient shipwrecks, is a little bit more spicy. So I suppose, where does the truth lie, and what is the backstory to this story?
Right. Well, the backstory is hinted at in the last paragraph of the Observer article, where it says the last
Okay.
phase of Enigma's fieldwork was carried out at the end of 2015, with the post excavation process continuing for years after and remaining unpublicised until now. Some of the recovered artifacts are being held in Cyprus, from where the archaeologists worked. Initial concerns that the site was in Cypriot waters have been disproved, Kingsley said, and the Enigma team now hopes the entire collection will go on permanent exhibition in a major public museum. Now, the Cyprus Mail, and in particular the Cyprus Antiquities Authority, have a somewhat less carefully nuanced version of what's going on. Now, what I'll do is quote from the Facebook page of the Department of Antiquities of Cyprus. So it's not being filtered through the journalists at the Cyprus Mail. This is what the Cyprus Antiquities Authority have said directly. Department of Antiquities have said directly, and anyone who wants to look at it will post the link to the page where you can read it in the original Greek and in English. Obviously, I'll use the English version. It says, quote, recent articles published in the British newspaper The Guardian and the English language newspaper of the United Arab Emirates, The National, regarding shipwrecks in the sea zone between Cyprus and Lebanon. The Department of Antiquities of the Ministry of Transport, Communications and Works, following recent articles in the media concerning shipwrecks in the sea zone between Cyprus and Lebanon, announces the following. The recent article in The Guardian of 18th of April titled Mediterranean Shipwreck Reveals Birth of Globalisation in Trade concerns the location of 12 shipwrecks during searches made by the Enigma Shipwreck project in the sea zone between Cyprus and Lebanon, and mentions that some of the objects recovered are being held in Cyprus. Another article of the newspaper, The National, titled Huge Ottoman Shipwreck Found After 70-Year Hunt, it is mentioned that the 588 objects recovered from the wreck in 2015 have been impounded following a dispute over documentation by Cyprus, which is seeking to sell them at auction. Now, that wasn't in the Observer article, that was in the other article in the Gulf newspaper.
Okay.
And then the Department of Antiquities goes on to clarify, in its words, the above objects were salvaged by Enigma Shipwrecks project in 2015 from a shipwreck described in the recent articles as a 17th century Ottoman merchant ship. At the end of December 2015, a large number of antiquities, primarily of Chinese provenance, as well as Islamic objects, were located by Cyprus authorities on the ship, and here is the stinger, Odyssey Explorer. They have been excavated in the exclusive economic contiguous zone of Lebanon and were confiscated as a result of a violation of customs legislation when the ship docked at Limassol harbour.
Yeah.
Basically what this is the wash-up of a project that I first wrote up for the Pipeline in 2016. 2015, and then covered again at Christmas 2015 into 2016 when the Odyssey Explorer was indeed arrested at Limassol.
Right.
And this row began. Dr. Kingsley has in the past worked as a consultant to Odyssey Marine Exploration, which our regular viewer will remember is, or at that time at least, was very active in underwater treasure hunting. And in trying to, shall we say, push at the boundaries of international legislation controlling salvage, like the UN Salvage Convention and the particularly the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage. So in what appears to have happened is that Enigma is a company that's registered in Britain in Companies House. It was an investment project, and Odyssey Explorer appears to have been working under contract to a company called Robert Fraser Marine.
Okay.
And so these artifacts are a byproduct of that expedition, or expeditions, in fact, plural.
Right. And so
and just to cut to the sorry, go
ahead.
Oh no, just to cut to the chase. The Odyssey Explorer, which was, I say, at that time was owned by Odyssey Marine Exploration, was working off Lebanon in the autumn of 2015.
Okay.
And when she put into Limassol, whether the Cypriots were tipped off by the Lebanese or someone else, or whether the Cypriots were already suspicious about what was going on, she appears to have docked at Limassol without declaring the cargo, and that's why she was raided by the Cypriots.
Right. Right.
And they impounded the material on suspicion that it had been taken unlawfully from the EEZ of Lebanon. Lebanon is a states party to the Protective Underwater Cultural Heritage Convention. So there are legal questions over the status of the material.
Okay. So, so what reads like quite an above board archaeological implication from a discovery, the birth of globalization in trade, uh,
Yes.
is actually quite possibly, and I suppose I don't know. I rather glibly said when we last spoke about this that this was possibly someone swallowing a press release. And yeah, we've talked about journalism in the past and people not really looking into things in too much depth. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned that this is an investment opportunity. How
Yes.
does that work? In so much as uh, why wouldn't these artifacts be declared, and yet also they're being publicized in this way, so as to, yeah, well, it almost feels like what's the word, opinion laundering, as it were, as opposed to money laundering,
Right.
but sort of legitimizing something in one way but also not declaring it. Why are they doing that if investments are on the line? In some ways, what's the model?
Okay. Right. Okay. First of all, it is absolutely vital to stress that there is no evidence so far that Dr. Kingsley or anyone else involved has done anything illegal.
No, 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 no.
Right.
Hmm.
What we are dealing with is questions,
Mm.
and what appears to be happening is that Dr. Kingsley and the company Enigma are providing an academic gloss
Mm.
to the work that was done as a result of a contract with a finance management company, which is what Robert Fraser Marine is. It
Okay,
supplies services to high net worth individuals.
okay.
And
And is it,
now,
and
again,
so,
there is no.
and is the idea therefore that these people providing services invest money on behalf of a client with a view to making a return?
Right. Okay.
I'm not, you see what I
Again,
mean?
I am not. Yes, I do see what you
Mm,
mean,
mm.
and I'm being very careful here not to talk about this project specifically. What I am going to talk
Oh, I
about
see. Okay, sorry. Right.
is a project. What I am going to talk about is a project that was run at the same time by the same company, Robert Fraser Marine,
Hmm.
with Odyssey as a service provider.
Hmm.
Um, and in fact, it's a number of companies. But in 2012, the autumn of 2012, the Times ran an investigation by a journalist called Alex Mostras into a company, into Robert Fraser Marine, who were offering high net worth individuals, including people like Bear Grylls,
Hmm.
um, an opportunity to invest in a way that was, shall we say, tax efficient.
Okay. Yes.
And the way it worked for the company that Alex Mostras published the article, the investigation about, which was again run by a guy called Colin Empson, who was one of the leading managers at Robert Fraser's.
Hmm.
Um, the way that one worked was the investors, who tended to be, as I say, high net worth individuals investing either themselves or on the advice of their financial advisors, will put money into companies that were set up to hunt for shipwrecks.
Okay.
If the company turned a profit, then they could take the profit, pay the tax on it, and walk away with a successful investment.
Uh,
However,
and
they
how
were
how
protected.
how
They
how does such a company make a profit?
Right. Such a company makes a profit by finding something that is sellable.
Okay.
And so we're talking about basically um, high value cargoes, so things like um, rare metals, platinum, gold, silver,
Hmm.
precious metals. The silver on SS Gersopper, for example, would have been
Hmm.
an example. Um, and that they make a profit by doing a deal with the ultimate owner, which is either an insurance company or a government, and take a percentage of the value.
Right. Okay.
um, and but they take all the risk.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's no win, no pay.
Yes.
Now, the way it works for the investors, or at least the way, I'd say, the way that the company that Alex Mostras investigated worked, was that the investor won both ways. If the company turned a profit, they were able to take their bit of the profit. If the company made a loss, and most of them do, because shipwreck salvage is incredibly risky,
Hmm.
it's a very professional operation. It's not something for amateurs to dabble with. And particularly the economics of treasure hunting for historic vessels is a basket case,
Hmm. Hmm.
which doesn't stop people selling it. And one of the reasons people still invest in it is possible to invest in these companies in ways that minimize your exposure to subsequent tax,
Right.
or you can set off the money that you invest in a way that enables you to write off some of it against tax.
Right. Okay.
So what was happening in the example that the Times quoted was the investment was done under a government scheme for high risk startup companies,
Hmm.
and the investor also, so there were government subsidies in place, and there were also and tax breaks in place,
Hmm.
and there were also they also took out a loan against loss, and they were able to write off the cost of the loan against tax until Her Majesty's
Because it's a
Customs and Excise
speculation.
(HMR). That's right.
Yeah.
That's
Because
right.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Until.
Unfortunately, it appeared. Yeah.
Mm.
What the Times exposed though was that HMRC, the British tax authorities, had looked at the scheme and decided it's what was called aggressive tax avoidance,
Hmm.
um, and therefore was illegal. And they closed that particular part of the company down,
Right.
with unknown consequences to the taxpayers. HMRC will never talk about this because they regard the privacy of investors and the companies as sacrosanct, and they will not go on the record about this.
No.
However, I know from individuals in the salvage industry that I've spoken to that in fact, yes, that particular part of the Robert Fraser operation was closed down by HMRC.
Right.
Um, so that's the background to this. Now, where Enigma fits into this, it's still an open question, but
Hmm.
certainly Enigma was a code word that was used in Odyssey Marine Exploration accounts
Hmm.
from 2009 into the mid 20 teens.
Right. I see. Okay. Okay. So, long story short, then, uh, when one sees these conflicting newspaper articles, that on the surface you could say, oh, well, of course they're going to have a different angle on it. They're from different countries, and maybe they don't like each other, or they have very different perspectives on, say, colonialism, etc. Um,
Yeah.
Actually, there's possibly more going on below the surface in these sorts of scenarios, uh,
Yes.
and yeah, and that's more or less all we can say about this specific situation, I suppose. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Absolutely. And as I say, uh, there are gaps in the story that's being told in the Observer and Gulf newspaper article, which need we're in the process of trying to fill in, basically.
Okay.
But as I say, no evidence that Dr. Kingsley's been involved in anything illegal, but there are many questions about exactly how this fine came about, where it comes from, and who knew what when.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, thank you for that. I definitely needed guidance there, and hope this has been interesting to folks at home. In so much as there's a, you know, what was it? It's things like the Untouchables movie, where people go, oh, what's tax got to do with anything? But actually, when you start looking at accounts, you get into actually what's happening in reality. And thank you for that. That was worthwhile
Well,
listening to.
it's the old truism that the feds didn't get Al Capone for the St. Valentine's Day massacre; they got him on tax evasion.
Precisely, precisely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's it. Follow the money. Follow the money.
absolutely. First rule of investigative journalism.